Welcome back to the Truth Expedition. You have tuned into the program where we scratch and claw to try to find some truth in this insane clown show of a world where the fact checkers lie and the government and the media propagandize you and me, the citizens of this amazing world. As always, joined by my friend and amazing co-host, Gunnar. How you doing today, Gunnar?
I'm doing great. It's going to be another fantastic episode. We're so excited to host our guest today. Anytime someone's blowing the whistle on the pharmaceutical industry, it's music to my ears, and it is incredibly appropriate in today's world. So pleased for today's guest.
Absolutely. So this is Sasha Latipova's second appearance on the Truth Expedition. Definitely go back and watch that first episode if you have not. You can follow Sasha on her Substack, which is incredible. It is my favorite Substack. It is sashalatipova.substack.com. Latipova is Latypova. Also follow her on X at Sasha underscore Latipova. So Sasha is and I'll give a more proper introduction once Sasha joins us, but she's a pharmaceutical research and development executive. She Her eyes were opened, as were many of ours in 2020, when she realized that the pandemic was actually a scamdemic or a plandemic, and she started doing some deep dives into what was happening, how the military manufactured this whole crisis. So yeah, we're going to get into that. I don't want to spoil anything. So without further ado, we're going to move on to the interview segment of the Truth Expedition. All right, folks, we are back for the interview segment, and I'm super excited to talk to today's guests. Today, we have the incredible opportunity to speak with my favorite health freedom warrior. Sasha Latipova had been a research and development executive in the pharmaceutical industry for 25 years. And I think, she has done the most heavy lifting when it comes to exposing how the COVID scamdemic was a military operation and it had nothing to do with public health, nothing at all. And Sasha, along with Debbie Lerner, just released what they're calling the COVID dossier. This is Sasha's second appearance on the Truth Expedition, so you should go back if you did not watch that first episode. As we go a little deeper into other transaction authority and the CARES Act and the PrEP Act, we'll talk a little bit about that today, but more of an overview today. My goal is to get you to follow Sasha's work, and you can follow her on X, and her handle is Sasha underscore Latipova. That's Latypova. So at Sasha underscore Latipova. And then more importantly, the Substack. Incredible work. Just profound and alarming, but truthful, not mincing words, not afraid to say the truth. And that's Sasha Latipova .substack.com. Thank you so much, Sasha, for giving us some of your time today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Absolutely. So let's start with very quickly. I'd like to, just for the audience and for myself a little, can you give us just a brief description of the PrEP Act, CARES Act, and how they're different?
Well, so I mostly focus on PrEP Act because that's more like a foundational piece for the crime that's being committed. I mean, it's ongoing crime of COVID. The CARES Act was more like, money part, funding all of this. But the PrEP Act, people need to understand much better that it's covered today because nobody's mentioning it on any side. Me, Catherine Watt, who actually originally uncovered it, and Debbie Lerman are probably the few people who are also James Roguski has been talking about it quite a bit. So, but there are very, very few people who even mention it as a problem. And people do not realize that everything that's going on right now is under the PrEP Act. And the PrEP Act allows the government to suspend the Constitution on fabricated emergencies such as COVID. But it's not only COVID. There are a total of 9 PrEP Act declarations extended currently, including COVID and several others, like avian flu and anthrax and Marburg, Ebola, and so that's and that's been extended. So for COVID, the emergency has been extended under PrEP Act until end of 2029. Again, nobody realizes it. People think COVID is over, and what are you talking about? You guys are obsessed about this. You're cranks and anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists. They don't realize that everything that's going on right now is still covered under COVID emergency. And as I said, PrEP Act allows the government to suspend the Constitution and, importantly, remove people's rights to sue for manufacturers' liability if they're killed or injured with these products that are covered by the PrEP Act, to sue for any wrongful acts like medical kidnap, murder in the hospitals. Just recently, there was a case, a Grace Share heartbreaking case. The Shara family lost their daughter, Grace, who had Down syndrome. She was kidnapped by the hospital and murdered in front of them. And they had to watch on video of doctors sedating her and murdering her with narcotics. Okay, she wasn't even ill. They purposefully kidnapped and killed her. And this is all covered by the PrEP Act. There was a trial by jury in Wisconsin, and the jury deliberated for something like half an hour after 2 weeks or 3 weeks of detailed hearings and experts and all that. They deliberated for less than an hour and returned the verdict not guilty, even though all the evidence showed, and the hospital put DNR on her, do not resuscitate, and without telling the family that. So can you imagine the hospital? So and the jury found that the hospital did nothing wrong. So anyone going into the hospital today admitted for anything, you will not know if the doctors put do not resuscitate order on you against your wishes, and your family will not know that either, and they can murder you just like they did with Grace. So that's what's going on under the PrEP Act. Again, all of these actions, all of these criminal acts, wrongful acts are covered by the PrEP Act, and that's why we need to pay attention to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to jump in here. So Gunnar, she asked the next question already, so that's great. So maybe jump to the COVID dossier question. But as far as I watched most of the Grace Share trial. Scott's a friend of mine. I'm in Wisconsin. I followed it very closely. I talked to Scott. We message. I've interviewed him several times. I'm heartbroken, but I think he's very realistic. I think he understands that he's trying to convince 12 sheep. I hate to say it. I feel sorry for these people. And I
Mhm.
think in watching the trial, and I'd be interested to hear if you agree. I don't think the defense proved that what happened wasn't wrong or unnecessary or tragic. All they proved is that it's normal.
Mhm.
Expect
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And that was the purpose, to normalize this horrid act of killing Grace. And by the way, people with disabilities like Grace were specifically targeted. For example, in the US hospitals, for some reason, 6 times more people with disabilities like hers died from COVID in the hospital from COVID. Okay, so because these people are targeted, and they are targeted by systems like Palantir, that's now in all the hospitals, that's being used to. So if you can now, they can individually target you. At admission, they have your data, not just your medical records that are in Epic system, but now all kinds of data, including your social media. Like, I can't go to a hospital now. I will not go to a hospital now because I'm a target because of my speaking against this, speaking on behalf of the victims. So if I get admitted, they'll put me into a special queue for the special protocol, right? And you may be admitted for the same thing and not have any of that. You'll have normal treatment, right? And then people will say, well, you're just conspiracies, guys. Like, how can you imagine this kind of stuff? I went for the same procedure. It was fine. So that's what's going on. That's what they're normalizing, that the doctors can decide on your behalf whether you live or die.
Yeah.
This seems outrageous, especially, when we consider our neighbors to the north in Canada, what they're doing with their
Mhm.
medical practices. When we look at this case, especially when it establishes a standard of care and sets a precedent like this, how are they gonna use this in the future? I think that's terrifying.
It
Sasha,
is, yeah.
what is the COVID dossier? Who
Mhm.
did the research on this? What does it generally cover, and where can folks find it?
Right. So the dossier is it's my collaboration with Debbie Lerman. She's a writer. She writes on Brownstone, and she published a book recently, actually, which goes into more detail than on the characters in the U.S. especially who participated in this. So her book is called Deep State Goes Viral. So it reviews all the actors in the deep state and what happened, and very, very detailed, great book. So she and I got together because she's also on Substack, and she's written about several important things, like early in the investigation about other transactions authority, the role of DoD, the role of HHS, and eventually we got together and decided to compile all the information that we had, indicating that COVID was a global military operation led by the US DoD, NATO, but it wasn't only through military alliances, it was through all kinds of other alliances, Five Eyes and intelligence alliance between those countries, EU, and World Bank and WHO and organizations like that. So it was truly global. Very interestingly, all the countries went in lockstep, even the ones who are ostensibly, let's say, militarily considered enemies, such as Iran, was implementing the same lockstep procedures, which to me says they're not really enemies that they're being presented to us. Russia, China did the same thing, exact same thing. As I said, it's not necessarily through NATO, but Russia and China controlled through the World Bank and debt, government debt. So anyway, so all of the countries in the world participated in this military attack on their own people. So the governments are acting through these coordination mechanisms using military laws, giving themselves emergency powers in the countries to implement these lockstep procedures everywhere. And so we documented it pretty much for all the regions in the world. So it's a listing for every country that we've profiled. And then the readers also submitted a lot of information and feedback, and we added additional regions and countries of the world afterwards and republished it. And the most important part for the US especially, we're very clearly showing that, and that was Debbie's original finding, that in the US, this operation was not a public health event. Actually, it wasn't a public health event anywhere. So number one finding from this dossier, this is not a public health event. It has nothing to do with illness. It has nothing to do with viruses. It has nothing to do with healthcare at all, or science. I'm sick of this, like, lead with science, gold standards. And anybody says science, just leave, just like leave me alone. Okay, has nothing to do with science. It's a genocide, global crime, military campaign to kill and injure as many people as possible with plausible deniability of this wrapped up in lies of a public health matter. And in the US, the campaign was led by the National Security Council. National Security Council was in charge of COVID policy, and it's a advisory body to the US president, consisting of military heads and intelligence heads. Health has nothing to do with it, and they were never involved in it, and they were never part of it, and so they did not know what the policy was. The exact thing happened in all the countries that we profiled. The healthcare agencies were not in charge. They were not involved. They didn't know what the policy is going to be, and they could not communicate without the State Department and intelligence services and military say so. So none of the health issues should be regarded as anything at all. And everything was driven by the military. Now, in the US also, by using the PrEP Act, as I said, the government suspends the constitutional governance, giving themselves extraordinary powers, claiming an emergency of national scope. And that's equivalent of announcement of war, because in the US Constitution, this kind of power is only given to the government if there is war on US soil. Okay, so that's what they have given themselves, and they haven't given up, and they're not planning to. And the current administration is not doing anything about it, as far as I can tell. And then after that, so we also found a couple of things on February 4th, and this is a whistleblower tape that I have received. On February 4th, there was a phone call from the DoD probably placed by Colonel Matt Hepburn, going to the pharmaceutical consortium, telling them that February 4th, 2020, telling them that COVID has been declared national security threat, which the public was never told. And the pharmaceutical consortium was told to switch over to COVID models and start producing COVID vaccines and therapeutics. And again, public was not told any of this. We were told it's a naturally evolved virus. But for several years, everybody who was suggesting otherwise would get banned, and I was banned off social media. But they were lying to the public for several years, telling them this is a virus evolved in wet market in Wuhan. While they, from February 4th, they told externally to pharmaceutical companies that this is a national security threat and invoked chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear defense laws. So the government is acting as if a bioweapon has been used, although that's a hoax also, but they're acting as if there is a bioweapon threat, and such a tremendous threat that it's nationwide in the US and worldwide. Okay, and as you know, that virus or whatever that illness was never dangerous. Like anybody who looked even early on, I looked at the data in March, April of 2020 for myself. I don't know. I hear the news about this virus and I'm like, maybe I should worry. I look at the data and no, I shouldn't worry. It's the same as flu. And
Right.
and it doesn't affect children and doesn't affect younger people. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm healthy and I don't have nothing to worry about it. But the government is organizing itself for war, invoking CBRN laws, puts National Security Council in charge, locks down the country, starts all this nonsense. So what are we having here? Why are they acting in such a strange way? Well, and then years of investigation and looking at all the data, compiling it to us, the conclusion is they did it themselves. They acted out this whole pantomime in order to implement these tyrannical measures and kill and injure as many people as possible, and they continue doing so.
Yeah, it hasn't stopped. People keep dropping dead suddenly.
Mhm.
It's tragic. But yeah. And so to the viewers out there, speaking of the PrEP Pact, in a recent interview that I listened to from Sasha, she talks about how the PrEP Act, in 2005, whatever the date was, Biden actually argued against it along with Hillary Clinton and then voted for it to
Yeah.
approve it the following day. Just it's all bizarre. So now we're going to get into this controversial part of the show where we maybe criticize the administration. Sasha's unafraid, as am I. I get attacked all the time for not bowing to Donald Trump and trusting everything he does. I mean, it's healthy to question everything. So let's get into Bobby Kennedy. You've been very critical of him, as have I. I mean, he said to get the measles jab. He said that's the best way. I mean, that's not what we expected. That is not what we voted for.
Yeah.
So, before he was appointed, were you hopeful that he was going to take charge and make some tangible changes when it comes to this mRNA technology rather than appointing Robert Malone, the king of mRNA? I mean, he hasn't done anything to stop these lethal injections. Are you dissatisfied with Bobby Kennedy Jr.?
Yeah, I'm very dissatisfied. So like I had interactions with him before, and I've been on his podcast a couple of times. The second time I was on his podcast, we discussed the military operation. So this was 2 years ago, and I've already had a lot of material, and so we've discussed. It's called Militarized Healthcare. People can find it. I have it on my Substack as it's with COVID dossier as well. So I've spent an hour and a half discussing with him on video everything that I'm talking about right now, the PrEP Act, the military operation, the funding of it through the DoD role, how it's a military, the vaccines and military products. And so he knows all this. And then he goes and joins administration. So what's important is, he ran an independent campaign first. And I was supporting him. I wasn't really enthralled with Trump. I wasn't planning to support Trump. I was planning to vote for Bobby. I'm sure a bunch of people were same as me. We were dissatisfied with Trump, with his first Of course, he's in charge of Operation Warp Speed, so I wasn't going to vote for him. And then Bobby decides to join his campaign, and so okay, we hold our nose and we vote for Trump because of this. And he actually delivered the victory to Trump, even though he had a small percentage of vote, but that was critical percentage to flip those people over from more traditional Democrats, and and then he joins administration and he starts doing this, yeah, go get measles vaccine. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? And then, I wrote an open letter to him. It's pinned on my Twitter profile and I put it on my Substack as well. I wrote an open letter to him in February, talking about the PrEP Act. He has the authority as HHS secretary to revoke the PrEP Act declaration. So not the PrEP Act itself, because that requires Congress, but the declarations under the PrEP Act, those 9 declarations that are currently outstanding. The COVID one was extended by outgoing HHS Secretary Javier Becerra in December to last until 2029. So we now have COVID emergency for 10 years. It's such a grave emergency that pharma companies avoid all regulation and all liability for 10 years for whatever garbage they ship and people get injected with. And so I wrote a letter saying, you have the power. The law says that you are the sole person on whose opinion we have this emergency now. It's just his opinion whether there is or there isn't an emergency. And also just his opinion whether the shots should be on baby's schedule or pregnant women or anyone's schedule, so that was my open letter saying, look, extending this declaration doesn't serve public health interest at all. It only serves interests of pharmaceutical companies. So what are we doing here? Anyhow, I can say he's aware of it. I did have a short phone conversation with him afterwards, not specifically about this letter, but about the other letter that we wrote together with Naomi Wolf and Shannon Joy and Dr. Mary Taylor Bowden. So I did have a short phone call with him, so I can tell you he's fully aware of these requests and these and that he can, and so he knows all this. I'm just saying, confirming all this. I have not fully lost hope in him or his actions, but I also don't want to sit here and be like, hey, oh, because as Naomi Wolf, we also Naomi and Mary Taylor Bowden and Shannon Joy, we all received phone calls telling us that we should shut up, sit down, support them, be gently encouraging, to which Naomi properly said, we're not his therapist. We, we're here to put pressure on the administration to deliver on their campaign promises. I mean, we're just being honest. Whatever you're saying, whatever you're doing is not what you said on the campaign trail. It's the opposite of it.
Sure. Gunnar?
Sasha, I've got so many questions. Okay, so what happened with COVID when it was released? Do you think obviously it was an intentional release? Do you think that it was an actual virus that was studied in a lab and intentionally released? Do you think that they used a bad flu year to fudge the numbers? And if it was intentionally released, how do you think that happened? Do you think it had to do with Fort Detrick? Do you think it had to do with the Wuhan military games? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so like this whole area of virology. First of all, virology is a pseudoscience. It does not use scientific method at all. I make jokes about virology. Because it is a joke, okay, but it's a very bad joke and very dangerous one that's been going on for a couple of centuries now. So now there's this whole new area of virology, which is this mythology about gain-of-function viruses. It is a mythology. It's continuation of the same narratives. They're just getting more and more, completely unscientific. So gain-of-function viruses are not possible. Rather, you can cook up something in the lab. You can make different compounds synthetically, and these are just synthetic chemicals, really. I mean, they're large molecules, but they're nonetheless synthetic chemicals. And you can cook up all kinds of things in the lab, especially you can generate all sorts of computer models. So the vast majority of golf literature is computer modeling, and that should be discarded right away. That's just live action role play and fantasy. Okay, so it's fantasy genre, and mostly it comes from sci-fi, and Hollywood participates in it very heavily to drive the propaganda through movies, through entertainment, through all kinds of stuff. And as I said, you can make computer models, disregard them. You can synthesize some of those computer models chemically. Usually, there are very, very tenuous methods by which they actually prove that they've synthesized what the computer says. But fine, right? Okay, I can spend another several hours discussing it, but let's presume you can synthesize some of those computer models in the lab. They don't transmit. Nothing transmits. They have never been able to transmit anything human to human or animal to animal, even like when the animals in the cage together. What they do in these studies with these GOF viruses, they either drown the animal in the solution so that they get pneumonia and stress, whatever, or they inject them directly into the heart, into the brain, so that doesn't show that this is a spreadable virus. It just shows you made some poison. And that's all like this whole golf thing boils down to this. They'll advertise a whole bunch of nonsense. They said SARS-CoV-2 has HIV insert and furin cleavage site, and it's so deadly and so spreadable. And then when Pfizer went to make their vaccine, and I've reviewed their preclinical package, their animal studies, and they tried and they've synthesized that GOF virus from the computer model with the HIV insert and with the furin cleavage site, and they tried it on monkeys. None of the monkeys got sick. There you go. That's your GOF virus in a nutshell. It doesn't spread. It doesn't make animals ill, even though, they said, well, the monkey is a good model for this because monkeys have the same ACE2 receptors as this thing was optimized for. Okay, and monkeys didn't get sick. But from directly like spraying them into the nose and throat with this. And they even produced large viral loads in the lungs. So the substance did get into the lungs and did replicate in the lungs, and nobody got sick. And the same happened with there was a Nature study trying to do this in humans, human volunteers. Again, they can't produce illness. The same happened with the Spanish flu and all kinds of other flu studies that they were doing. Can't on purpose infect anyone. If you can't on purpose infect anyone with this, even like trying really hard, how the hell is it spreading all over the world? From Wuhan military games, from market, from this or that? It can't. So that's why like this whole GOF virus is a narrative. Now, what they can do is they can simulate the effects of what they're claiming this thing is going to do, or let's say not full effects, but some of the effects, enough to scare people who have been predictably programmed to believe this, to say, oh, you have itchy nose, runny eyes, you have loss of taste and smell, therefore you have this super deadly virus. Maybe you don't feel so bad right now because it's asymptomatic, but it's so deadly you need to go to the hospital, where depending on your triage, if you Grace Shara, you get put into the murder protocol. Okay, so that's how they will simulate them usually with chemicals, a little like some. So there's a propagandist, James Giordano from DoD. He's a neuroscientist, and he does all this psyops. Basically, and so he's done a few lectures explaining this, and he said we need about 200 cases to simulate a pandemic. So it's not a lot. Like you just need a few sentinel cases here and there, and then a huge amount of media propaganda, fear mongering, all this nonsensical. Oh, you have a asymptomatic virus. You need to test with PCR, and so that people run to the PCR testing, and then based on a positive PCR test where they're not sick at all, it's just a positive PCR test, then they run to the hospital, and then the hospital can use different Palantir targeting software to target the people that they need to eliminate. That's what they're doing.
Yeah, I agree. And you touched on something there. I had that as a question, and I know you don't necessarily, and to me, it's one of the biggest questions of all here. And I know you don't, as I don't know the truth. You don't take a position on whether viruses exist or not. But when you listen to Dr. Cowan, Dr. Kaufman, who I interviewed, you're hard pressed not to come away very skeptical that viruses even exist. And when I talked to Dr. Kaufman, because when I worked in ICUs during the scamdemic, and I believe there was something. Now, maybe not a virus, maybe it was some toxin, some poison, or even the power of intention. Dr. Kaufman's like, well, if you tell people, because there was a study done where they studied chemotherapy therapeutic agent where 40% of the people lost their hair with a saline solution. So that just goes to show that when you're telling people over and over and bombarding them with fear that you're going to get this illness, you're going to get this illness, you might just get it. So, so I kind of, some days I think viruses don't exist. Other
Mhm.
days I think of herpes or chicken pox, and I'm thinking they do. And I mean, can you comment on that? I know you don't take a position necessarily, but can you just kind of
Yeah.
give your thoughts?
Yeah. So the reason I don't take position is, viruses, you just get into, I don't want to play into the games of virology at all. Like, I don't even want to dignify you have to debate us with science. So what I'm saying is, if you believe in something invisible existing, okay, and viruses are invisible. So if you believe in something invisible existing, it's largely your belief, a religious belief, okay? um, if it's an invisible benign thing, especially. So they're saying, so viruses started from, it's a toxin, then it's a causative agent of grave illness, and now it's been, oh, majority of them are benign. Well, if it's benign and invisible, I don't care if it exists, and nobody should care if it exists. That's one thing. Now, if we're talking about the causative, so where I become more interested is when we're talking about causative agents of severe illness or spreadable illness or something like that, something pandemic, like when they start telling us they cause pandemics. Okay, that's where I'm interested. So when you're making causality claims, that's a different ball of wax. We have to look at that. And that's what I'm saying. They're completely unscientific. They don't use scientific method, and they simulate these things with chemicals because they can't because none of the stuff that they cook in the lab or isolate from nature actually spreads. And they can't spread it even when they're trying hard enough. Now, he is correct about the placebo effect or psychological inducing illness by psychological methods. That's very well known. That's actually been studied quite a bit, was very popular in the 60s and 70s, and then kind of went by the wayside because of the pharmacology in psychiatry. So, but in psychiatry, prior to all these SSRIs and things like that, before it became so pharmacological, it was looking into hypnosis quite a bit. And clinical hypnosis has been demonstrated very well by many studies, and it shows that a large percentage of the population is suggestible by words alone. So it's not everyone, but under normal circumstances, it's something like 10 to 15% of the people. If you tell them and you describe the symptoms to them, like you said, if you describe the symptoms to them and you tell them something, they'll get that illness. And conversely, it also works to cure people from addiction, from all kinds of things. You can hypnotize them and you can do positive suggestions, and they will be cured. So that's the placebo effect. We always deal with that in pharmaceutical clinical trials. It's a big problem in things like CNS, pain studies. It's a huge problem. It's almost impossible to develop drugs in that area because of a very large placebo effect. And so that, whoever is the cabal behind this pandemic, the military deep state cabal, they know this very well. So they knew this very well. And this is underlying all the psychological weapons that they have used to simulate the pandemic. So largely, if you think about it, it was all psychological. It's all the fake news media showing those people falling in the street in China, telling all kinds of different symptoms to you. And that's also James Giordano in his lectures also says we're looking for hypochondriacs. to when we put all these like headlines in the media so that they run to the hospitals and they actually get symptoms and they become sick. So yeah, it's a large percentage of the population reliably will produce this effect. But it's not to say that they didn't use some chemicals also. I strongly believe that they did because there's also very long history of DOD using spraying different aerosols, different and just spraying chemicals and metals. So the metals such as cadmium and zinc, which DOD has used, they've used cadmium, zinc sulfide, fluorescent particles very, very extensively to spray. And those produce flu-like symptoms because there's also even a category of, it's called welder's flu. So in welding, it's an occupational hazard. If you inhale the metals, vaporized metals, you'll get flu. So no virus, but flu. And that's how that's how they can simulate this.
Gunnar?
Sasha, I want to ask you about the COVID vaccines. Do you
Mhm.
think that there were batches that were more lethal than others? Do you think that that was another method, obviously, of population control? What are your thoughts on that? Were some batches hotter than others?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I was the first person who identified this in 2021. And again, I was immediately banned, censored everywhere, screamed at everyone, including very prominent freedom leaders, calling me, a crank, and that, no, 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 all these vaccines are like manufactured under good manufacturing practices. And I have 25 years of experience in pharma R&D, and I can tell you definitively, looking at the data, none of this is CGMP, not even close. And so, yeah, so some batches were, especially early on, the batches were super toxic. So the first ones that were released between December and April of 2021, so December 2020 and April 2021, were the most lethal and the most toxic. Now, they were also the highest utilization batches, so it's hard to, do proper adjustment. But the magnitude of variation was so high that even if we adjusted for the doses, they're still by far the most toxic ones. And I think that was on purpose because they were targeted first at the elderly, and the elderly are a big target of this because they are the claimants on the unfunded liabilities of the U.S. government that today counts up to 150 trillion. So government debt is 37 trillion, but unfunded liabilities, which include pensions and Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, promised for all these people, puts it up to 150 trillion. Okay, so that was their target, and because those were target, we need to protect the elderly. They released them first into the nursing homes, and especially like were made them available. They also created this huge, oh my God, there's shortage. We just need to quickly vaccinate all the over 65-year-olds. And then some of it also was targeted at healthcare workers. So to me, that says they knew that eventually people will realize that this is toxic and they'll have to back off on the toxicity. So the first batches were the most poisonous, but then variability is still very high. So even with they sort of reduced the toxicity over time, but I think they just dilute them more basically. But also because these things are not produced to good manufacturing practices, the variability is all over the place. It's completely, you just don't know. And also under PrEP Act, as I said, the PrEP Act allows them to not comply with any pharmaceutical laws. So these products are EUA countermeasures under PrEP Act. EUA countermeasures, regardless of what the FDA says. The FDA now claims they're fully approved. But people need to realize that in the US law, it says that EUA countermeasures can be adulterated, which means any kind of ingredients can go in there. They don't have to comply with labels. That's why the variability is like this. They don't have to comply with good manufacturing practices. No pharmaceutical laws apply to them, and they can be misbranded, which means you can lie about them. So the FDA is lying about them, the government is lying about them under all administrations, but they're not breaking the law. It's legal, So that's why. So that's why I'm saying until this PrEP Act declaration is removed, nothing has changed. They're continuing the same policy, they're continuing the same strategy.
Yeah, I'd say the variability of the strength of these vaccines to kill, I think, was intentional too, because they couldn't kill everyone at once, because then that'd just be so obvious. So they're evil, but they're not dumb.
Hmm.
Um, that's very clear. So we're almost out of time, Sasha.
Yes.
I'm very conscious of that. So let's just have one little more discussion here. I would like to talk about Donald Trump a little. I voted for him. I was hopeful, hesitantly hopeful. I don't trust any politicians. I don't trust any government. But I think on day two of his administration, we knew where it was going. I'd like to know what your thoughts were when he had Larry Ellison and Sam Altman, and they're talking about AI surveillance and mRNA technology being advanced and the billions of dollars, and how Peter Thiel's Palantir plays into this. And then I'm going to throw this in there too. If you've watched or looked at Zoe Smith's work on how
Yeah, I
she
know Zoe.
discovered that they collected everybody's identifiable DNA. And
Hmm.
how is this going to be used? What is happening here? Is every government in the world involved with this? Is, like you said, we're not enemies with Iran or China. It's just like, I just threw out a lot of thoughts there, but how about you kind of just bring that together for us and wrap up the show?
Right. Well, so Trump administration is, as I said, they're continuing exactly the same things that Biden administration was doing, and Biden was continuing what Trump was doing. So they're just passing the ball to each other on the way to the goal. And the goal is their Agenda 2030, so they don't make any secret of it. And if there was recently there was Bilderberg meeting in Sweden, and you could see their agenda. It says depopulation and migration. Also says resilience, something about resilience. So that's another one. Resilience is their code word. It's like a dog whistle for all these bioweapons. So anyway, uh, they're not making secret of it. So Trump is continuing. Now, I think so. What in general, the office of president or executive branch, or let's say that political veneer that gets changed through pretend elections every 4 years, uh, is just a veneer, and they're almost separate from they're completely separate from the deep state that runs the government. Their superficial layer to distract the public with pretend democracy. So they get switched every year, and they now have they have to kind of fund their own show. So the government apparatus runs on money that is committed and they can't do anything about. These clowns that get replaced every so often have to fund themselves. So the way they fund themselves, their political campaigns, is through people like Larry Ellison and Palantir and all these oligarchs and pharma companies. Pharma companies are very, very important to them. And importantly, the political campaigns are funded by capital gains, not by cash. So they need to produce capital. So they're now that veneer, their objective is to produce capital gains for the people who fund them. And it has nothing to do with actual operation of the government. And so that's what they're doing. So they've collected money from Larry Ellison's, whoever, Jeff Bezos, whoever gave him money, Elon Musk, Pfizer, Moderna, a bunch of pharma companies, and now they have to deliver on the campaign promises. You think that those are campaign promises to us? No, no, no. They're the campaign promises to Larry Ellison and Pfizer. And that's why, because that's where the money came from, not from us. And so that's what we see. That's how they act. That's why he does this, or, Stargate project, or now currently I'm more focused on HHS. So HHS, instead of listening to vaccine injured like we were hoping for, they were saying MAHA, all that. We were hoping that they will finally notice the vaccine injured. Well, Marty Makary, our new commissioner of FDA, and Vinay Prasad, head of CBER, FDA, they go on a listening tour of pharma companies. And they're saying we're creating a safe space for pharma companies. And they just approved another next spike from Moderna without any placebo control studies or any long-term safety monitoring, directly opposite of what they promised to everyone. So that's what's going on, because as I said, this is a show that runs by itself, has to fund itself, has its own, contributors. They get their returns through these mechanisms. The public is here alone for the ride. We're just being made fools of. So that's what we need to understand. We need to call them relentlessly on it and remove our trust until they do something that's trustworthy.
Yeah, absolutely. The government is a cartel, a legalized mafia. And, don't take my word for it. Do your own research, audience. Research Sasha's work, Catherine Hudson Fitts, Catherine Watt, Zoe Smith, James Corbett, people like that. Come to your own conclusion because you're not going to believe me if you're worshiping Trump right now. Fine. I don't want to criticize anybody. You want hope. I understand the need for hope, but you need to ask those questions and then maybe come to your own conclusion. That was perfect. It's 9:46 Pacific time right now. We did great. We love you, Sasha. I know this work that you're doing is exhausting. You run into walls, you get attacked, but please continue doing what you do. We need you in this fight, and it's not over. And most of all, thank you so much for your valuable time today on the Truth Expedition.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for watching the Truth Expedition. Don't tread on me and don't shed on me.